This interview is on July 10th. Welcome to the Polytopian Interviewer, where I interview people on their experiences and views on the Polytopia Discord community. I have Cuttlersan with me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well.
Well, it's nice to talk with a fellow person that's also making a Polytopia podcast. There's only two that I know of, including us.
Yeah. It's a very elite area to be in, I guess you could say. Not elite, but...
Niche?
Yeah, niche. Yeah, That's it.
How did you first get into the Polytopia Discord?
Well, I was invited by J.Fur right after they made the big announcement about my podcast. I think that was back in the Barter episode. Prior to that, I wasn't actually active. I was honestly more on the subreddit. That's where I did a lot of posting, conversations. It's where I first started sending out my podcast big time. It was kind of all a big shock. I didn't realize there was such a big Discord community until I got brought into it.
Mm-hmm. You've been around for less than 3 months, yet you started a podcast called the Polytopian Times and got quickly recognized. Why did you start it?
It's a bit of a long story, so let's go to the start of it. Last year, about late April, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. That's a blood cancer. I was going for chemotherapy and get my biopsy done so they could take out the tumor on my throat. Just do their best to get the chemotherapy in. It was a lot of time I spent in the hospital. I was sort of faced with my own mortality. While I was going through treatment, I found a lot of time to play Worldbox and Polytopia. That's what I spent a lot of my time doing. Eventually my friends reached out, started to play with me online, and they'd never played before, so I had to teach them how to play. We started doing 1v1 little cage matches to get them on par with me, and then we started doing big bulk group games. It was one of the few rare things that actually gave me proper entertainment while I was in the darkest of places I've ever been. Once I got through treatment, I just kept faced with my own mortality, kept looking around and thinking to myself, oh, I kind of want to leave a little mark on the world, do something of my own. Just my little way of raging against the dark, I guess you could say. My first shot was to actually try and revitalize my YouTube channel in January and February. I tried to run it about 5 years ago, and then never really kicked off. It was a lot of work for mostly downvotes. I gave it a second try, just trying to revitalize my strategy, doing a lot more editing, be a little more relevant to the audience, maybe something that people might actually enjoy. It sort of happened. It wasn't huge. It was a lot of work. It was just largely the same story I had the first time around. So then I got a little pressed on that one, didn't want to bother with it anymore, and just started playing a lot more Polytopia with my friends, getting more online with the subreddit, more on games with like random one-on-ones, just getting more involved in general. That wasn't a lot of podcasts I like to play, so that was always in the back of my mind too. And I remember looking for like a Polytopia lore strategy podcast, and there wasn't like an offering there. I always thought it'd be cool to listen to while I played. So about the time the balance patch comes out, I'm sitting around one night on the Reddit thread discussing the patch updates, and I'm thinking to myself, a lot of these newer players or these folks who aren't as in-depth on the game, well, they ask a lot of the same questions. It's almost like one concise answer they could just listen to. Yeah, it'd be good for people. So they pretty much that same night, it was like Polytopia podcast sounds like maybe a thing that I could do. It's Blue Ocean. There's not like a million people doing Polytopia stuff podcasts. There's Gully and a bunch of people on YouTube, and so I decided to go with the Polytopia podcast. I recorded on the spot that night, and, well, podcast took shape from there.
Why did you choose the Polytopian Times for your podcast name?
It's actually related to the last story. That same night, I've got my recording done. I know what I want to sort of do with the podcast by this point, but I need a name. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what are big publication names? I'm thinking, like, there's the Times, there's the Free Press, you have the New York Times. And that's where I got my idea. I was like, New York Times? Okay, so replace New York with Polytopia. I need some element of the game title in there. I can't just whiff it off and then not reference what the podcast's main focus is going to be. Battle Love is not going to be anything that's going to identify it, so it has to be Polytopia in the name. So I'm thinking to myself, Polytopia Times, but that didn't sound quite right. You had an end to the end, though, and yet Polytopian Times So New York Times became the Polytopian Times, and it was simple, effective, and it sounded nice.
In my opinion, it sounds a bit weird, like it should be a newspaper, but again, that's just my opinion.
Honestly, newspaper, news outlet in general, doesn't really matter. I just like the sound of it.
Fair enough. What's your current vision for the podcast?
I'm going to finish up the rest of the Tribe episodes, continuing to cover updates as they come out, and probably pivot more to strategy once we're done with all the lore with the tribes. I've done strategy in pretty much every episode in Tribes too, but there's less and less lore to cover now. There's only so much for the whole game. Every time I knock down a tribe, that's one less episode that's going to be more focused on lore.
Or you can just make up your own.
I suppose I could, but I don't want to jump into creating lore on my own. I'd rather cover what already exists first.
Okay.
That's a fair idea, though.
Do you think that the quick publicity you received was good or bad? And why?
I think it was ultimately good. It was certainly unexpected. Came out of the blue, but getting a little bump to listeners was nice. It's not like everybody who jumped onto the podcast stuck around, but I'm happy to see that there were a couple of people who listened to it and thought it was worth listening to some more. Really, anybody that gets to hear it and sees that they enjoy the podcast is a win. I just want people to enjoy what I've created, so getting it out there for more people to potentially enjoy was a good thing.
I kind of have the opposite stance, where I want to have a lot of episodes and really high quality before lots of people get onto it, so that way more people would realize, oh yeah, this is something I want to listen to. But again, that's kind of more of a just personal preference.
Yeah, honestly, I've only seen increasing numbers of listeners, so not too worried about it.
What's your current process from the start to the finish for a new episode?
It's nothing crazy, so I use the Anchor app, and I'll record my episode right in there. Usually about 2-3 days before I record, I go out and knock out an outline, so I'll pull in all the lore I can. There's only so much you can pull in, but I grab every piece I can, and then I try and make a nice, concise description, a little story about what the lands would be like if you were to walk through there. I wasn't doing that at the start of the podcast, but as I've gone through the lore some more, I'd like to try and make it all concise, cohesive. I want to give like a nice, unified image of what the tribe's life is like, what their culture and their lands are like, instead of just reading off descriptors. Then, after I've got my outline done, I've got my nice little lore section out and some bullet points for general strategy points to talk over. And I just pop right into the Anchor app and do a recording. Once I've finished with that, I edit it right in the app and schedule it to go live, usually every Friday at 7 a.m., unless it's a special update episode. Again, I'm kind of limited to only doing those when an update comes out, so there's only been the 2 so far, but they're out like the day after the update comes out, so there's adequate coverage there.
You mentioned before that you played the game quite a bit. Do you usually do like 1v1s casually?
All sorts of stuff. I'll do plenty of 1v1s, but most of those are focused on training folks. I've had quite a few people reach out to me just to do 1v1s cage matches to see if I can get a little better, which I'm totally happy to do. The goal is to get it so they can beat me. Generally, after like 7 or 8 games, especially, I like to call out the aggro hole with a lot of new players. It's really easy to stop investing in your economy and only focus on the attack. And it's like, That's great, but now you've got a turn 5 eco at turn 12, and I'm going to beat you. Just stuff like that. I do a lot of bigger player games. One of the guys that taught how to play Hawthorne, he's out like just finding as many competitive players as he can. And generally good players, better than the lot I run in on 1v1s or elsewhere. Mind you, I'm starting to get into the actual competitive scene, and he's like just a touch below them, but getting up there. It varies. I think some of the folks who play with us are on the line of the competitive scene, whereas some of the folks are very good amateurs.
Will you be joining Polychamp soon then?
I've gone on and jumped into the Mallards team just to take a look around, see what it's like, get a feel for what the scene is like. I would like to eventually get into it, along with the Polylympics. It's really just personal stuff. A lot of my time gets sucked up with doctor's follow-ups and just making sure I've not gone into remission. And then I'm running around with weddings and personal stuff in my own spare time when I'm not working. So it's really when I find those clear weekends and stuff, I do just want to pop on. And even if I'm not on the team, maybe play against some of the people who are in the Mallards, because I know that the skill level there is as good as you're going to get for Polytopia. And I definitely want to hit that point where I'm losing fights, but learning every time I lose.
What about the Jets or the Vikings?
They seem just fine, too. Just one of the guys that asked me to teach him how to play wound up bringing me into the Mallards, so I'm already there. Kind of interested in seeing what's in that current little pond. We'll see, though. There's definitely more potential as we go on. Just know, while I'm not a bad player, I'm certainly not at the point where I can dominate in the competitive scene whatsoever. I think it's good for me to sit in the background, just play some games against more skilled opponents while I grow in my own skills, and then we can look at maybe becoming more active once I've got the skills to back it up.
Sounds like a plan. Do you have a favorite tribe at all?
I like a variety of them. I used to be more of an IMO main because I loved rushing philosophy on the second turn. At the end of the day, it's all depends on what map you're going to play. When I was an IMO main, I was playing a lot of gigantic maps, 1v1s, like maybe 4 people on the map. So you're going to have a bunch of cities and need the philosophy discount if you want to keep up in techs. Whereas, like, nowadays, play whatever. It's all situational. Honestly, every week, I try and focus on the tribe I'm covering. Last week, I was playing only Hoodrick. This week, I'll be playing only Quetzali. During the time of the podcast, at least, I'm limited to what I'm covering.
Favorite strategy at all?
Nothing too specific. I'd keep it simple. My thought is ABE, always be expanding. The acronym's ABE. As long as you're always expanding your economy, your territory, and your tech tree, you're doing well. If you stop in any of those fields, you're probably making a mistake and need to start at least focusing on your economy again.
Mm-hmm.
That's so high level. It's not even really a strategy for a specific game. I guess if I'm going to have to go with like a tactics level strategy, I like the shield wall. It's not the strongest at all. It's definitely counterable, and kind of easily, depending on how many times you run into it, but it's cheeky, and it looks nice. Just seeing that row of defenders with archers behind and raining fire down on whatever's in front of them, maybe supported by a catapult behind that, while I'm just weakening enough points to get a knight through. It's really gratifying. It looks organized like an official battle on a battlefield, instead of like a bunch of warriors running through the woods and smacking each other in the face.
Mm-hmm. What's the most memorable game you've ever played?
That one's going to be a game with Hawthorne. We were both learning at this point. He gotten good enough to beat me like 6 or 7 times in a row, and I was making my comeback on another massive 900 tile map, 1v1. He was playing Polaris, and I was playing Cymanti. He got the initial run because it was a continents map, so he could freeze the water, make his entrance over into my lines, and break off contact while I was still trying to drastically rush up some Reichi, just anything to get up there. Well, he got me hemmed into my final 4 cities when I finally got my little Reichi through, and he wasn't paying proper attention. See, on the left side of the map, there had been some new cities, and we were rushing to try and get there first before the other person could. He just grabbed the last one, starting to move some units towards me, and I had a lot more focus over there. On the eastern side of the map in the south, I popped up a bunch of Reichi, started smashing through his ice. He was drastically trying to turn around, get some knights out there, maybe some ice fortresses or battle sleds, but he didn't have any cities that were directly connected to the ice in that region, so they all got stopped by that 1 to 2 tiles of dry land before they could get to the ice and get that movement. So I just used that time to clear up half the river, started shooting out way more Reichi, and took over the one coastal city he did have in the south. Once I got myself a little piece of dry land on his end of the river, I was able to start spamming out Dumuxes and support him with Exedas. That's all I needed to break through his ice fortress wall. It took a game I was definitely going to lose, turn into a game I won narrowly, but did win. It's memorable because it was just fun. I always thought of it as like Song of Fire and Ice. You've got spring and summer in the bugs, and obviously winter in the Polaris tribe. It was almost a poetic matchup.
Yeah, Polaris versus Cymanti can be pretty interesting. Also can be very grindy.
It's almost kind of a decent counter to Cymanti. specifically because they can freeze up their frontline cities, like those Dumoxes and stuff. If you can make a line of frozen units that your enemy can't get past, you can take your time shooting over them with your own catapults, or just choosing a point in the wall to break and then sending a couple of knights through to kill whatever's on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what happened to me quite a bit.
How many games are you usually in at once?
Maybe 6 to 8. I don't try to play too many. I mean, my total count's only at like 111 or 112 at this point. I've got an okay number of games under my belt, but I'm nowhere near like 600 to 700 like some really good competitive players can be.
Better keep practicing then.
That's the idea. Keep at it. It's always a ladder up to better skill, and I want to keep getting better. Thankfully, I'm still at a skill level enough where I can give general advice, especially for newer players who might not know anything. Again, that's my core audience. I'm not going after competitive players who have got 100 plus games under their belt, because there's probably nothing I'm going to tell them they don't already. But I think I do have the experience required for newer players, folks who might not know why knights change the battlefield entirely when they show up, or that defenders might actually be useful if the warrior in front of them only has 2 health.
Mm-hmm.
But keep trying to get better. I know there's a lot of people who are better than me. Got to keep at it. I feel like I've got at least some skill now.
That's good. Is your favorite part of the Polytopia fandom your podcast, or is it something else?
I like the fandom in general. My podcast is my podcast. I'm glad it's there. It'd be extremely selfish to be like, yeah, and narcissistic. Only my stuff is the best stuff. Honestly, this stuff they put on the subreddit's great. The podcast you do, Polytopian Interviewers, amazing. We got the Times, and they've got wonderful updates every bit. They just do a personality quiz to find what tribe you're into. That was really cool. It's just awesome seeing the community be awesome. The best part of the Polytopia community is the community itself.
So what tribe were you in the quiz?
I wound up being Illyrian, which is funny because they're one of the tribes I don't play as often. I get you can do Polytour spam and sanctuaries for stars, on their Dreamland custom ports in a way. I don't farm dragons a lot. If I'm going to play a special tribe, I'm going to wind up playing Aquarian because I just find them fun even though they have a horrible economy, or Cymanti if all gloves are off, and I'll come at you with what I know is the strongest tribe in the game if you want to go 100% all out. Don't really play Illyrian, ever.
But they have magic!
Magic and minotaurs and dragons and whale monsters and...
Yeah!
I mean, they're strong. Honestly, I spend way more time hunting dragons than growing dragons. Just takes knights and a couple archers, and you got yourself a dead dragon real quick. One turn. That's how I like to hunt them anyways. Knights are fast, you can get them from your city back. You have the archers in range, in the general range beforehand, but just get 2 of them up there. They do enough damage that your knight can basically knock them down to 1 or 2 health. Even if he lives, it's just barely.
But then it might grow into a fire dragon with 20 health.
If it's a baby dragon, generally we're talking fire dragons already. The fire dragon's going to stay closest to your front lines because they don't get to move after they attack, and they need to be 2 tiles away like the archers are to do some damage. So as long as I leave some shields up for them to hit, and leave the archers with some roads about a space behind that so they can run through the roads to get to the point where the shields were, then they can get in range to do some damage without getting hit the turn before, and then rush some knights in around them to finish the job. That's generally what my thought is when I'm on dry lands and I'm in close proximity and I've got the techs lined up. Otherwise, deal with dragons, but they usually show up so late in game, you can have knights and archers, and then just, there you go, you got your flexible way to murder them. That's my take on it. There's obviously plenty of strategies for it. Take your pick, but if I had my pick, that's my preferred way to axe a dragon. Either that, or if you're on the water, I mean, battleships are amazing, because they just get smacked, especially once you get aquatism. You got 4.5 defense, and basically nothing can do more damage to you than your defenses.
That's all the questions I had.
Thanks for having me on there. It was a good conversation. I know I kind of talk a lot, so sorry about it if I didn't give you enough opportunities to chime in.
What? You should listen to Loki's interview.
Well, Is it an interview, or it sounds more like it might be a monologue at that point?
You're going to have to listen to it and tell me. I'm not sure.
I definitely will have to give it a listen. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
See you later.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
As always, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share it. For the text version, you can join my Discord in the description. I also have a YouTube channel where I play 1v1s and occasionally do tutorials. We'll be back next week. Bye!